morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to the launch of the new Climate Technology Report. My name is Sarah Trejo, and I'm the head of the Technology Transitions and System Innovation at UNEP Copenhagen Climate Center, and I will be moderating this event. This year, we are launching a new collaboration between the UNEP Copenhagen Climate Center and the UNFCCC Technology Executive Committee on a Climate Technology Progress Report that will take stock of where we are at in enabling climate technology development and transfer. Before we delve into the report, I would like to mention a few housekeeping guidelines. Please use the dedicated question function that you will see on your screen to submit any questions you may have to the speakers. And we will take them up during the question and answer session. You can type questions at any point in time during the presentations. The session is being recorded and can be accessed afterwards through the website unepccc.org. The event is scheduled for 1 hour and 15 minutes, and it will last. We will have a Q&A session of 20 minutes at the end after the presentations. We'll start our program with remarks from Mark Radka, Chief of the Energy and Climate Branch at UN Environment Program, and from Ambrosio Giovanolo Del Real, Chair of the UNFCCC Technology Executive Committee. Immediately after that, I will briefly introduce you to the overall report, and we will have presentations of the main report findings from the lead chapter authors. After this, we will have the Q&A session. Our speakers are joining from various parts of the world with various internet strengths. So if we have technical challenges, please do bear with us. So without further ado, I would like to invite Mr. Mark Radka to take the floor. Mark, please, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Sarah, and a warm welcome and thanks to all of you for joining us for this online release of the Climate Technology Progress Report 2022. This has been a very busy season, in fact, a very busy 2 weeks for climate reports. To name just a few, in the last weeks, we've seen the release or the launch of UNEP's emission and adaptation gap reports. We've seen IEA's World Energy Outlook come out, the WMO Greenhouse Gas Bulletin. An analysis of updated NDCs has been put out by the World Resources Institute and by the Climate Change Secretariat in Bonn. And of course, earlier this year, the IPCC 6th assessment report was released. All of these reports have 2 points in common. First, they all explain through numbers and very good analysis that we're running out of time. They're not reducing greenhouse gas emissions quickly enough. The commitments in NDCs are inadequate, and the countries are mostly not even honoring those. The second point that they make, and relevant absolutely to today's report and discussion, is that existing technologies can get us very far along in making the needed emissions cuts and allowing us to adapt to a changing climate. The technologies are out there, they're proven to work, but we need more and we need faster deployment. 25 years ago, I had the good fortune to be a coordinating lead author on an IPCC special report on technology transfer. The full name was Methodological and Technological Issues in Technology Transfer. So I led a small group of authors who were responsible for a chapter on trends in the transfer of climate relevant technologies. It was a chapter toward the front of the publication and in a sense helped set the context for the meatier chapters, the important ones that followed. This exercise proved to be much more difficult than any of us anticipated. Definitions of technology and transfer were very different. Data was scarce. It was inconsistent when you could find it. We could get pieces of a mosaic, but there was nothing at all like a complete picture. And we pointed out these challenges in the report and had hoped that someone would take action. But we could argue that 25 years went by without any systematic and regular assessment of climate technology development and transfer at the sectoral and regional levels until now. And that's why we're very pleased that the UNEP Copenhagen Climate Center and the Technology Executive Committee have joined forces to fill this knowledge gap with the aim of informing action on tech transfer. As you'll hear today, the report being released, the Climate Technology Progress Report 2022, makes a very good attempt to answer the following questions. What progress is being made? What has enabled this progress? Very critical for learning and replication. What are the gaps that exist? And building on all this understanding, how do we better enhance climate technology development and transfer efforts? You'll hear more about each of these aspects from the authors of the report. Looking ahead, our ambition is that the future editions of the report will cover both developing and industrialized countries. And we hope to prepare these successive editions through an interactive and engaging process that involves country representatives. Before I turn over to Ambrosio for some introductory remarks of his own, I want to thank all the authors, the steering committee, and others who have made this recent report possible. It's been a pleasure to work with you, and I really wish to congratulate you for your labors. Thank you very much. Oh, Sarah, over to you.
Thank you so much, Mark. We really appreciate your introductory remarks. So, Ambrosio, I would now like to invite you to take the floor and turn on your camera and your microphone.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the welcome words by Mark, and I take where he left, appreciating the work made by the authors on this report. Before going into that, I'd like to say, despite the dire situation we have now, reflected in several reports that were released in the previous week before the COP, this kind of report of what it entails gives me a lot of hope. Also, the whole process, in which way? In the way that you manage to get inside the process a lot of different representatives of governments to actually agree on around 50 different agenda items. And in the case of this report, that you manage to get so many people from different countries and regions and continents to work on, sometimes on a very short time frame, to release such an impactful and complete report. Of course, this is the first version of that report, but I would like to make the emphasis, because probably most of the people that are here today are people very committed to solving climate change and to provide climate change action into the investigation, that it needs to be appreciated how people that work in a pro bono basis many times. Of course, most of the authors in the report are also IPCC authors, so they have been working almost all this year, and now they've been able to deliver such an important report focused on the hosting country of the COP, Africa. So I wanted to take an extra time to appreciate the effort by the authors and giving you, telling you how this opportunity and how the impact could be expanded in the following years. So before going into that, I want to tell you a bit about the TEC. The TEC has a very special place within the UNFCCC. We do things that other institutions also that are doing, but we also do something that we as TEC are only allowed to do. And this is because within the mandate of the TEC, we have to recommend guidance on policies and program activities related to technology development and transfer. We have to recommend action to address the barriers to technology development and transfer. And we're also have a mandate to provide recommendations to the COP and the CMA, to the parties. And this is very unique. And this report represents a bridge between what you may call the Ringo constituency or research center investigators, and of course, a lot of the IPCC authors, and the UNFCCC process in a way that probably doesn't exist in a very systematic way before. So now this report also represents an opportunity to fill in the gaps preparing for the next IPCC cycle. What gaps? You have on the mitigation, the working 3 report, there was no regional analysis, and now we're aiming to do that through this technology series. Also, on the adaptation report, the working group 2 report, there was no specific focus or chapter on technology, but now we're aiming to do that through this report. So now this is a basis not only to provide recommendations to parties on these specific issues at the regional level, but also to explore ways to fill in the gaps that are in the current cycle of the IPCC, and also help prepare what can be done in the future cycle of the IPCC. And this is a huge opportunity. Now we're bridging the gap between the two worlds, the IPCC world in a way, because so many authors are from the IPCC, authors also, and the UNFCCC process through this collaboration. So after saying that, I really hope that we can continue working this way. And again, I appreciate the work by the authors, because in a way, this represents and gives a lot of hope on so many people working many times on a pro bono basis to solve the current threats to civilization and humanity. So thank you so much. Back to you, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Ambrosio, for putting the report even more into context also of the work of the convention and the IPCC work. And before I will hand over to the authors and introduce the chapter authors as we go through a few slides for each of the chapters, I just wanted to give you a bit of context on the report. And you have already heard much of this from Mark and Ambrosio, but the ambition of the report origins in we want to provide a systematic and regular assessment of progress on technology development and transfer at the regional and global levels, and to do that on a regular basis going forward. And we aim to this year put out the framework or test and try how can we actually set up an approach for doing so. So this year's report is to be seen as a scoping report where we establish and seek a framework where we can actually track progress over the next coming years. Therefore, we are not applying the framework and the approach to a full extent, but only applies it on limited data. And you will see that from the chapter presentations as well. And these questions that we pose in the report, and that was also mentioned just before, they seem to perhaps to be quite simple. What progress is made, what has enabled it, and where are the gaps? And building on this understanding, how do we enhance better climate technology development and transfer? So these are very simple questions, but they're actually really, really hard to respond and to answer. So if we go to the next slide, we have structured the report into 3 different parts. We have a part A, which aims to give decision makers a kind of, you could say, guidance at the global and regional levels on ways to think about the issues, how the issues raised may apply in their context, and it may impact decision making in that sense. So it can give policymakers an idea of what's happening, how feasible could it be to implement certain technologies, and it can sort of be a part in their broad toolbox and give an indications of what are the issues and how do we think about this. Then we have the second part B, which is a continuation somehow of the part A, where in part B we go into different dimensions of the feasibility assessment presented in part A. This year we zoom in on governance, we focus on finance, and going forward we may and we will include more aspects than these, but these are also those aspects that are highest ranked by countries themselves in challenges to establish the required frameworks for actually enabling technology development and transfer. So this is why we're focusing on exactly these 2 in this year's report. And then we have a part C, which provides more context-specific information, where the value added comes from more in-depth case studies trying to identify within that cases something that other countries can take out. This year we are exploring climate technology transitions in Africa, offering some contextual details, and providing somehow an overview of climate technology megatrends in African countries. But we will hear more about that. So without further ado, I would actually like to invite two of the authors for the so-called Chapter 3 on feasibility assessment. We would have Deborah Lee, who is a lead author of IPCC's special report on 1.5. She holds a PhD in geography from University and environment from University of Oxford and works at the UN Economic Commission for Latin America. Together with Deborah, I'm happy to also introduce Elizabeth Gilmore, who holds a PhD in engineering and public policy and works at the intersection of technology, society, and policy to better understand and identify solutions to complex problems posed by climate change. She's also a lead author for the 6th assessment report, which is actually also the case for Deborah. So please, Elizabeth and Deborah, the floor is yours, and we will change the slides. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. So next slide, please. So as mentioned by the previous speakers, we discussed the feasibility assessment that was started off in the special report of global warming at 1.5 degrees C of the IPCC and expanded upon in AR6 and both working groups, working group 2 on impacts, vulnerability and adaptation, and working group 3 on mitigation. And part of the rationale for doing this feasibility assessment is to have it a little bit more, include different types of information sources such as indigenous knowledge, trying to be more contextual and not just at a global basis. So having a more diverse literature, basis of literature.
Deborah, you may be on mute. I'm not sure, but at least we cannot hear you at the last part.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Thank you. Somebody must have muted me.
Yeah.
I hope you can hear me now.
Yes.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. So I was just saying that the feasibility assessment was created to close several of the gaps identified in previous types of assessments. So we follow a series of steps here, in which we first, which you can see in the slides here, where we start by defining the scope of the assessment we want to do. So we have it at a global scale, but we also have it at different regional and sectoral scales throughout AR6. And then we identify different indicators. And this is important as we go over 6 dimensions. So we look at the dimensions of economic, technological, institutional, socio-cultural, environmental, and geophysical, looking at how indicators within these different dimensions can help, if they have a high feasibility or if they have different barriers. And we create what we call a line of sight, which is a database including the different references for each specific indicators. Once we have identified the literature, in reviewing the literature, we answer a series of guiding questions for each one. For example, are technologies simple to adopt? Are technologies robust enough, amongst others? And what's important in terms of being robust and transparent here is that each assessment is then reviewed by 2 to 3 additional experts. So you have one person doing the assessment and then reviewed by 2 to 3 experts, just to ensure coverage of literature across different, especially to ensure regional diversity. And in the formula at the bottom of this table shown here in the screen, we show how we combine indicators within each dimension. So it's the combination of indicator level assessments, which is mainly the arithmetic mean of the relevant underlying indicators, and come up with dimension level score. And then we can follow the same methodology if we wanted to have one composite feasibility grading. As I mentioned earlier, one of the other benefits of this feasibility assessment is that we assess synergies and trade-offs. So what are the positive and negative implications for mitigation of adaptation options? And what are the positive or negative implications for adaptation of the mitigation options? So in the slides that follow, you'll see how this feasibility assessment is shown and how it can be interpreted. Next slide, please.
Thank you. Oh, can we go back a slide, please? Sorry. Thank you. So we start here by really demonstrating the method. And so we drew examples from critical domains for technologies related to adaptation and mitigation. And here we show energy generation technologies, those for renewable energy for mitigation, solar, wind, and storage, as well as options for adaptation, reliable and resilient infrastructure, for example. And the FAQ here can provide crucial information, and just to stress, right, particularly beyond just economic considerations. And so we can look at where technologies have high feasibility. We can talk about why this is the case, and we can also identify where efforts are needed to remove additional barriers. Now, you can also see some differences between the mitigation and the adaptation analysis. And some of these methodological differences represent in part decisions made by the analysts, but also the type and quality of available information. And so for mitigation, which you see on top for the renewable energy technologies, there's both enablers and barriers along the key dimensions, where for adaptation, we focused primarily on barriers only and used a more discrete scale of low, medium, and high feasibility. But the take-homes are still the same. So for mitigation, rapidly increasing the use of renewable energy technologies is a cornerstone of climate mitigation policy. And we see a high feasibility overall for solar energy across almost all dimensions. Yet we still reveal some barriers, especially related to land use, distributional effects, recycling, and in some cases like wind as well, related to issues of political support. But we also reveal, again, some important information that are about that public support, where the positive impacts lie, as well as where, for example, some high upfront costs may inhibit the adoption of some forms of solar technology for low-income individuals and communities, especially those in developing countries. We can also look at energy storage technologies, again, evaluated quite positively by the public, but we can also highlight here that we can show both a generalized as well as a more disaggregated picture of technologies. So this is a more generalized look where we show that the number of options, small, large, and modular forms of energy storage, in fact, enhance its feasibility. But we could also break this down to reveal that some technologies are still in earlier stages of development. Climate adaptation here is, for example, supported by enhancing the resilience of energy grids, especially under extreme weather events. The reliability of power systems as well has a high feasibility in technological and social dimensions. Yet our feasibility assessment also reveals where there is less information. And for many of these adaptation options, we see less information available for equity and gender considerations. What this could tell decision makers is to pay close attention to monitor performance on these dimensions during implementation. Next slide.
So here we can see, for example, how water energy, water-based options appear in the three different system transitions on land ecosystems, land, ocean, and coastal ecosystems, as well as energy systems, and urban and infrastructure systems. So even though all of them have water management or water use efficiency, we can see here, of course, that there's a different basis of literature and different assessment, different feasibility gradings for each one of them. We can see that throughout the institutional dimension is the one that has the most barriers across, but that in general, we have between medium and high feasibility throughout. But this also shows where the different barriers are depending on which system transition. So if we're working, for example, under urban and infrastructure issues, our main concern is institutional, and with the big research gap on the social dimension. For energy systems, we're mainly looking also at some environmental, mainly related to drought issues, because this assessment looks especially at areas, at technologies that use water for cooling that also in many cases coincide with areas where there are drought. And lastly, for land and ocean ecosystems, we have geophysical, we have a high feasibility under environmental and economic, and medium feasibility in other dimensions. So this shows how even when just talking about water, the dimensions and areas of focus change. But this also highlights here with water how there is a relationship amongst the different system transitions. Next slide, please. In this slide here, we can see some of the synergies and trade-offs that we have with the different technologies. So if we look at, for example, panel A, resilient power system, energy reliability, and improve water use efficiency, we don't see trade-offs with mitigation. And in fact, the mitigation literature also talks about these options as helping in cost effectiveness and in performance of energy generation technologies. And some of the other options under agriculture, like improved cropland management and agroforestry, have some trade-offs, mainly because we can have other non-CO2 emissions. And when we move for implications for adaptation, if we take, for example, solar energy, we can see very strong synergies, and the trade-offs are mainly dealing with the different types of waste at the end of the useful life. So within the chapter, and specifically in the annex, as well as in the IPCC's AR6, we can see the breakdown of where the different synergies and trade-offs are. And in some cases, we also see different research gaps. And of course, where there are trade-offs, that doesn't mean that we necessarily have to avoid the option, but it's more of to pay attention to minimize those trade-offs. Next slide, please. And of course, we know that this report is focused on Africa. So this figure here shows the feasibility assessment of adaptation options in different agricultural options. And we can see in the low feasibilities, mainly in the institutional and technological dimensions, that there are research gaps. So we have more data for example, economic and social, but the lack of research also points out that the need for more technologies to be implemented in Africa. And as pointed out in the chapter, some of this is due to the lack of climate services and lack of climatic data to be able to better target these technologies. And as Ambrosio had mentioned earlier, Working Group 3 doesn't do a regional approach, However, we can also glean, at least for energy, where the different energy priorities and technologies are. And now I'll just turn over to Elizabeth to provide the final takeaway messages from this chapter. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. So the strength of this method really lies in its reproducibility and its transparency. So as we provide these findings, we're able to assess them with the type of confidence language that really characterizes and informs all IPCC efforts. And in this way, it can also provide decision makers with a high degree of confidence in these findings. We also show across these various slides also some of the flexibility in an FA or in a feasibility assessment. And in this way, you can do a number of things. You can ask decision makers about dimensions and indicators that are important to them. You can also really gear it towards the available literature. And so in this way, it really allows you to mine what is available and put it into a consistent framework. Now, one of the things that made us excited about this opportunity was that this technology report provides a way also to improve and enhance on feasibility assessments outside of an IPCC context. And so feasibility assessments are sort of a snapshot in time, but looking at a series could show how some of these feasibility dimensions and these technologies improve or enhanced by specific policies or interventions. The other thing that this allows is really drilling down into regions where we can draw not just upon literature, but increasingly upon experts, as well as promote all voices. Thank you.
Thank you so much, both Elizabeth and Deborah, and thank you for all the work in the early mornings and late evenings on this report. And I would now like to invite from the University College London, Lucas Somariya Cruzato. Lucas holds a PhD in Science, Technology, Engineering and Public Policy from UCL and has a deep understanding of international cooperation in the context of climate change. Lucas, I would like to invite you to present some findings from the chapter on governance, institutions, policies, and social dimensions. Please, Lucas, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for giving me the floor. Hello, everyone, and distinguished colleagues. It has been a real pleasure to be involved in this first production of this timely report from UNEP CCC and the Technology Executive Committee. I also want to take the opportunity to thank the colleagues who participated in the drafting of Chapter 4, who put their time and their effort into making it possible. So in the interest of time, I will jump straight into the content of the presentation today. I want to start by saying that understanding and supporting enabling environments for technology development and transfer is critical for achieving low carbon and climate resilient development. However, the development and transfer of climate technologies and particularly their diffusion encounters multiple challenges and how these technologies get adopted into national socioeconomic context. Therefore, creating such enabling environments requires deeper understanding of enabling dimensions and conditions. And this includes not just the technical feasibility, but also the social, political, institutional, regulatory, and financial dimensions, because these underpin the capacity and the capabilities of national actors to manage their own national innovation systems and introduce technological changes more effectively. So Chapter 4 in this report largely focusing on understanding the progress being made so far in the developing of these enabling environments in the support of climate technology development and transfer. So while the ambition of this report moving forward is to have a broader global scope, for this year, we mainly focus our attention on governance of enabling environments in the context of developing countries, particularly taking a regional approach on Africa. So for the purpose of this chapter, we focus on trying to characterize some of the context of these enabling environments and providing illustrative cases. There's two cases of what could enable success that I'm not going to be able to go into too much detail in this presentation, but mainly I will focus on the analysis of recent survey data that was collected from UNEP CCC from a range of African countries to try to draw lessons on the social, political, regulatory, financial dimensions. And finally, present summary results and some recommendations for improving the governance of enabling environments for climate technology development and transfer moving forward. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the analysis presented here is based on a survey of government officials with portfolio responsibility for climate technologies. The assessment provided here is for individual technologies, looking at adaptation and mitigation, and relate to enabling environments for these technologies, largely drawing from agriculture, energy, and the water sector. So quickly on the findings, we can see that there is moderate progress that has been made in creating such enabling environments so far at the national level for both mitigation and adaptation technologies assessed, with marginally more progress for adaptation technologies. The progress is relatively consistent across the different dimensions, but uneven within each individual dimension. The figure in the chart illustrates the average score for the adaptation and mitigation technologies assessed within the 5 dimensions of the enabling environments for the survey. The line chart illustrates the variation of individual indicator scores for each of the 5 dimensions. So we clearly see that there's limited progress that has been made, particularly on the financial dimension. Respondents have assessed in the perception that is the least advanced dimension for both mitigation and adaptation technologies, with scores on all 4 indicators scoring significantly below the average. So the respondents also assessed that that funding from industry, markets, and private sector remains low, presenting still a significant barrier for unlocking opportunities for technology development and transfer. There's also challenges in establishing links between policy and international sources of public and private funding so far. In terms of the institutional policy support, we noted that this is having more impact in some areas rather than others, and that the institutional links between policy on climate technologies and international public sources of finance were relatively as below the average for both mitigation and adaptation technologies. We also noted that at least respondents' perception points that there is limited progress in terms of integrating technology transfer policies within sustainable development policies at the national level, and also including, at least on the drafting documents, the inclusion of the role of women, indigenous people, and local communities. So they have, respondents have assessed still a very low progress in linking this technology policy and indigenous people and local communities. Next slide, please. So there's some key messages, recommendations drawing from this chapter. Largely, we see that climate technologies are perceived by many as essential for advancing low carbon and climate resilient development, but only insofar these resources and financial resources and capacities are available to the stakeholders who are engaged in making these decisions and implementing climate technology programs and projects on the ground. So results from the survey conducted with African stakeholders this year shows that there has been some steady progress, but there is a lot of improvement that needs to happen. So there are a few recommendations that we've been able to pull out. The need to address more complex and nuanced elements with dealing with enabling environments. And this includes a greater understanding of culture, gender, identity, institutional settings, policy and regulatory regimes, human capabilities on the ground, the processes for accessing resources and capital, understanding and dealing with national ownership issues, and really unpack, really try to understand national strategies that have been deployed in developed in countries for science, technology, and innovation, particularly around national innovation systems. This all required an in-depth quantitative and qualitative assessments at country level. To continue to strengthen the enabling environments by considering further how such enablers apply to a specific context. For example, African countries are politically, socially, and economically diverse. Their aspirations, needs, and capacities for meeting climate resilient development will vary, and these differences need to be taken into account. C, to pursue efforts to innovate around strategic dialogues with stakeholders and try to improve the landscape for generating partnerships. In the African context, we think that African governments and international donors could develop dedicated strategic alignment conversations, specifically trying to link climate technology development and transfer processes with NDCs and other relevant national policy priorities so that they increase legitimacy. Another recommendation is to take urgent action to ensure access to balanced climate financing, technology financing. This is still a significant challenge. In this respect, the international policy and financial community continues to prioritize mitigation over adaptation financing for climate technology transfer. And African countries are already constrained by the lack of adequate access to finance, which is a clear and significant barrier that must be rapidly addressed in order to generate enabling conditions that will support progress on technology development and transfer. Another recommendation is to support strong and transparent governance for fostering enabling environments, and to nurture the development of institutional social policy capabilities through long-term programmatic activities. These again are linked to dedicated financing for actions that are focusing on strengthening and building synergies for these enabling conditions. Finally, to enable mission-oriented coordination and step-up efforts across the board with stakeholders, and develop further work on integrating climate technology and governance frameworks at the national level is essential to the delivery of successful climate technology projects and programs in the short, medium, and long term. I tried to cover all the essentials, but I invite everyone to read the chapter. And I will stop here and happy to answer questions during the Q&A. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lucas, for this presentation, and it's been really interesting to follow the development of the chapter. So thank you, Lucas, and if we go to the next chapter, I would really like to invite Jens Sedmon, who is the head of the Environment and Climate Change team at the OECD's Development Cooperation Directorate. Jens is working on climate change, biodiversity, green finance, and sustainable oceans in the context of development, cooperation, and finance. And Jens is also here with his colleague Manon Fortemps, who's a junior policy analyst at the Financing for Sustainable Development Division. So please, Manon and Jens, I would like to invite you to turn on your cameras if possible, and otherwise turn on your microphones as well. And the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I'm afraid I think I have some problems with my camera, so I'll just deliver the presentation and hope that works well, but then Manon can take over and you can see her. But let me maybe jump straight to the point here. We've heard in the previous presentation already a couple of times the importance of finance and its central role for technology transfer. And I think 3 points really stand out in this regard. The first is access to finance, and that's because the deployment of technology, including certainly climate technology, is typically an investment, whether by the public or the private sector actors, and the availability of and access to financial products and services is a basic condition for the ability to invest. Unless you can access finance, basically you find it very difficult to invest. The second point relates to cost of finance, because the cost of finance is a key factor in overall affordability, and that's particularly the case aggravated in investments or technologies that are very capital intensive and have a long life cycle, because it concentrates expenditure up front, and that means that the relative cost of financing over the life cycle increases. And I think one could say it's particularly important, not least for the deployment of mature technologies as well, which many developing countries have prioritized, in particular with regard to adaptation option, because it's not so much the technology sophistication or the technology recency, but really the cost of finance that drives up the overall cost. Third, there's support for the enabling environment. And I think we've heard, again, a lot about the enabling environment as an importance for overall deployment. But it's obvious that unless an economy disposes of the kind of soft infrastructure, the capacities, institutions that are essential for technology transfer, basic constraints exists for deploying technology. And that enabling environment itself requires resourcing. Now, in looking at finance for these different challenges, we can differentiate according to 2 lines. The first is really, providing financial support directly for the strengthening of the enabling environment, the institutional framework, the capacities on the one hand, and on the other hand, the direct financing of public procurement and investments, which is particularly related to infrastructure investments that imply technology choices, etc. And second, which is very closely related to the overall question of the enabling environment, is basically strengthening and deepening financial developments, including with a particular focus on financial products and services for climate technologies. Because the financial sector deepening and development in itself is a key factor to enhance overall access to climate finance and to reduce the cost of using and deploying that. Next slide, please. So data limitations make it very difficult to actually separate out finance that is specifically supporting climate technologies. But if we take a broad proxy for support to the technology in the form of research and development expenditure as a share of GDP, it is very clear, and at the same time also quite unsurprising, that support grows very strongly with income levels. And actually, if you look at the graph, you can see it's quasi exponentially. And what you see there, again, is the share of GDP according to different income groups: low-income countries, lower-middle-income countries, upper-middle-income countries, and high-income countries. But the effect becomes even much more stark when looked at in terms of per capita spending equivalents. If you look at actual income levels and translate that into per capita expenditure, you would have about $3 per capita of R&D expenditure in low-income countries, $9 for lower-middle-income countries, $76 for upper-middle-income countries, and $814 for high-income countries. Now, that's not, again, exclusive for climate technologies, because data for that didn't exist, but I think it provides a very clear picture of the scale of the challenge in terms of finance provided towards overall support for research and development and technology deployment. And with that, I will now pass on to my colleague Manon Forton to present some of the key findings with regard to international support to climate technologies. Manon, please.
Thank you, Jens. Yeah, so as Jens has just discussed, domestic resources towards the enabling environment and public procurements are scarce, especially in low-income countries. This is why international support is key to complement these domestic resources. So in the graphs you will see in the slides, on the left hand, international support to the enabling environment for climate technology is proxied by climate development finance channeled through grants. And on the right hand, support to public investments and procurements of climate technologies is proxied by climate-related development finance channeled through debt instruments. So for the 2015 to 2020 periods, development finance in the form of grants provided on average $5.9 billion per year in support of the enabling environment for climate technologies. While when looking at debt instruments, it amounted to about $16 billion per year in support of public investments and procurements, which is about 3 times the volumes channeled through grants. In terms of sector distribution, you see on the left graph that energy accounted for the largest share of the grant-based finance, while large volumes were also directed towards agriculture and general environment protection. Now, when looking at debt-based instruments on the right graph, you see that the bulk of finance for the period went to energy and was followed by transport and storage. It is worth noticing that for the support provided through debt instruments, energy and transport amounted to 80% of the total support channeled. While climate-related development finance channeled through debt was predominantly targeted at mitigation, the resources channeled through grants were more evenly split between adaptation, mitigation, and cross-cutting activities. And you see on the graph on the left side that this is especially true in the agriculture and environment sectors. Next slide, please. Now, regarding distribution by income, low-income countries received the largest share of support related to the enabling environment among the different income groups. The support to lower middle-income countries was slightly lower, but you can see on the left graph that it dropped significantly for upper middle-income countries. A further important observation is that you will see that there is a high share of finance that is unallocated by income groups. Further analysis would be needed to draw definite conclusions, but we can see this as an indication of a substantial share of support being directed towards cross-country activities or broader international initiatives that support climate technology development and transfer. Now, if we look on the graph on the right, for debt instruments, we see that in terms of income distribution, low middle income countries are by far the most targeted income group. And low income countries are the lowest recipients of climate development finance channeled through debt. So again, the picture is quite different depending on the type of instruments we are looking at. Overall, the volume of development finance provided towards climate technologies, both in terms of grants and loans, does not match the needs of developing countries and also tend to decrease rapidly as income level rises. This is why the bulk of financing in the medium term will have to be generated out of domestic financial systems and their enhanced access to global financial markets and capital pools. Next slide, please. So the domestic financial sector will have to play a key role in enabling large-scale development and transfer of climate technologies for developing countries. This will allow to reduce the cost of borrowing, increase the availability of financial services, and allow for market creation for technologies. Again, data availability on financial sector development is limited in developing countries. Nonetheless, a look at financial sector depth and access to financial services through the World Bank Global Financial Development Database seems to reveal that financial development improves with the income level of a country. In addition to financial sector development, it is key to integrate emerging good practices for greening the financial sectors. And you may be aware that in recent years, African countries have increasingly joined global climate finance initiatives such as the Network for Greening the Financial System. Now, as you see on the graph, targeted development finance interventions that unlock climate financing can help accelerate financial development. This is especially true for development finance, targeting specific climate objectives and deployed towards either financial policy or formal sector financial intermediaries. While support to formal sector financial intermediaries addresses specific financing products for climate technologies, support to financial policy relates to the broader integration of climate change into financial system, which is obviously key for efficient pricing of climate technologies within an economy. So as you can see on the graph, formal sector financial intermediaries such as banks and insurance companies received the largest volume of climate-related support in absolute terms for the period 2014 to 2019. Support to financial policy was relatively lower. It is also worth noting that in recent years, there's been an increasing focus on blended finance instruments that have the potential to unlock commercial finance and contribute to market creation for technology development and transfer. Next slide, please. Now, in conclusion, finance is key to address the structural bottlenecks that inhibit technology development and transfer, notably for resourcing the enabling environments and with regard to access to and the cost of finance. We've seen that the tighter the constraints of public finances are in developing countries, the comparatively more important is the role of development finance. A few recommendations are that the large-scale investment necessary for achieving sustainable development based on climate-resilient pathways will require mobilization of finance from private markets. And overall, the availability of financial services for investment is a basic factor for the viability of technology development and transfer. This makes financial services a key component of the enabling environment for technology transfer and investment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Manon and Jens. Really appreciate it. And I would like to go straight into the next chapter presentation, who is what we have as a so-called part C, a third part of the report, where we will actually have a look at more detailed case studies of specific topics. And for this year's report, we have one chapter in this part of the report, which is the climate technology progress in the African context. And it is my pleasure to welcome my colleague Lakshmi Bamidipati, who is an advisor here at the UNEP Copenhagen Climate Center. Lakshmi holds a PhD in sustainable energy transitions, and her core areas of work include renewable energy policy, uptake of climate technologies, private sector engagement and business models, and related topics. So without further ado, Lakshmi, please, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Hello, everyone. So I'll be presenting on a thematic focus around a snapshot looking into broader trends and a high-level snapshot into the current state of play on technology development and transfer. And I'm presenting today on behalf of the lead authors and the contributing authors for this chapter. So this chapter provides a snapshot of the macro trends and case studies of climate technology progress in terms of technology development and transfer in various parts of Africa, with a particular focus on energy, agriculture, and water sector. It also presents 3 case study briefs for each of these sectors, and then reflects upon these recent changes in the climate technology landscape, drawing upon the feasibility dimensions and the enabling elements, which we've already heard from the previous speakers, to gain a better understanding of the factors underlying progress, or even hindering, as the case might be, among the select climate technologies. Next slide, please. So sharing a few highlights here without going into a lot of detail, we try to look into the broad trends, big numbers, and also the geographical spread of the progress and penetration in the continent. On clean energy, as most of you would already know, technologies such as wind power, solar, PV, geothermal, bioenergy technologies are already being diffused widely across various parts of Africa. Over the last decade, for instance, we've already seen deployment of renewables from nearly 1 gigawatt in 2010 to almost 19 gigawatt by 2021. Geothermal projects are in operation and underway, but mainly in Eastern Africa. Even within renewables, we see a more stronger spread in the Eastern African and Southern African part of the continent, and not as much on the Western and Central parts of Africa. The uptake of renewables in cooking or cleaner biomass and LPG is still relatively low in most countries, except for in Kenya, Ethiopia, and Senegal, which are relatively ahead. Within the agriculture sector, we see that progress has been mainly in the areas of crop diversification and climate resilient crop varieties, irrigation systems, and also information and communication systems. New early maturing resilient crop varieties, including drought, flood, heat, pest tolerant varieties, are being diffused across various African countries, and this work is also being led and coordinated by the consortium of International Agriculture Research Center, CGIAR. Various information technologies from sensors and weather forecasts monitoring are used to monitor soil, drones to monitor farms. Still in early stages, we see some penetration, particularly in South Africa, also use of Internet of Things to predict yield in Uganda and Mali. Within the water sector, we see progress across the areas of water resource management, treatment, harvesting, water storage, and also clean water supply and sanitation. On water monitoring and decision support, for instance, web-based systems and technologies have been diffused for water and sanitation sector across 55 member states using harmonized indicators. We also see use of water treatment technologies for clean water supply. However, most countries are still falling behind on the disaster risk preparedness when it comes to flooding and drought, forecasting, remote sensing based on early warning systems. In addition to the three sectors, we also briefly looked into the spread of the innovation and technology hubs in the continent. And while over 600 technology hubs have been identified across various African countries, we also see a relatively limited share of those on climate initiatives and climate hubs. And most of them are concentrated in Kenya, Uganda, South Africa, Nigeria, and Ghana. So even if there are many initiatives, they're also more concentrated geographically. Next slide, please. Drawing on some of the macro trends as well as some of the case briefs, which dive into specific technologies around large-scale renewables, irrigation technologies, and digitization around agriculture sector, we find first on clean energy, there are several front-runner countries that still need strong political commitment in phasing away coal. For instance, South Africa, as the report also notes, and this is despite high feasibility and also despite favorable enabling conditions. Countries that are ahead in the energy transition curve need to be further equipped to reap the benefits in terms of the broader socioeconomic developments broadly, and also countries that are still lagging behind need to be supported with establishing markets and improving policies and regulations. On agri-water irrigation technologies, we see that they're mainly being driven by large government and donor-led schemes, but also to a large extent by individual farmers, only those who can afford these technological solutions through direct sales or through end-user financing options. There's still a continued reliance on petrol and diesel-based pumps. However, we are starting to witness some early-stage market formation around solar-powered pumps and more private sector experimentation ongoing. And irrigation systems are generally complex, which also requires a higher level of coordination and knowledge among a host of actors for effective penetration. Within more digital technologies and digitization in the agriculture sector, we find that the density of the entrepreneurial activity is high in some countries, again, very concentrated in the continent. However, it also may be a sign of more formative market development as well, and or market at a more formative stages. But there are several opportunities in this space, including focusing on more digital skill development, vocational education, and also developing legal frameworks around data protection, for instance. Next slide, please. Finally, on some key messages, and we highlight three here. To sum up, we do indeed see progress in climate technology development and transfer across the various parts of Africa. However, it's very varied across sectors, countries, and regions. In some cases, the progress seems somewhat systematic, and in others, predominantly sporadic. What is clear is that there is a significant variation among the countries in their ability to deploy technologies to meet their climate goals. Efforts to accelerate this in Africa needs to take into account these various differences as well. Second, there is an important intersection between climate action and development needs, where issues such as access, equitable development need to be addressed alongside implementation of climate technologies. Addressing the tensions between climate action and development priorities, as well as maximizing synergies among them, will likely be key to continued and accelerated action towards climate technology progress in the African context. Finally, as other authors and presenters have already pointed out, availability of data has a big impact on our understanding of climate technology progress. While data is more available for some sectors, technologies, and countries, in general, data is relatively sparse and sporadic. We also see a more consistent data in some of the mitigation technologies, like in the energy sector, for instance. However, not so among several of the adaptation technologies. There's a need for more systematic analytical interrogation into technology progress, as we also have started and attempted to do, and reflecting also on more of local experiences, co-benefits, and outcomes beyond mere facts and descriptions. That's my time. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Lakshmi, and the rest of all the presenters. I would like to invite all the presenters now to turn on your cameras, and we will then go to the Q&A session as we have received some questions. We still have some time left for the questions, so actually I would like to pose a question right away to Deborah and Elizabeth, who has come on the feasibility assessment on economic feasibility. We have a question here: how do you factor in government support through public funding? No, do you factor in government support through public funding into the feasibility assessment? Because one rebate from the government can make a technology viable for the masses. So that's a question for, I don't know if it's Elizabeth or Deborah. I can see you, Deborah, and Elizabeth. Please go ahead.
Yes, the answer is that yes, all different funding types are considered. But like, for example, on the side of adaptation, we look at macroeconomic indicate viability, microeconomic viability. We also look, for example, at employment potential and different economic co-benefits. And I'll let Elizabeth complement here.
Thank you. Sorry, it takes a moment with those controls. So just building a bit on what Deborah presented about what we put in the economic dimension, things such as subsidies, as they would sort of reflect government policy, tends to fall more kind of in institutional aspects. And so while you would see this reflected in sort of microeconomic or macroeconomic viability, the activity of doing it would also be reflected in the political / institutional support. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And then I have a question for Lucas. Lucas, you say that climate technology progress is at varied pace across sectors, countries, and regions. Can you give some examples of why this could be? So why are the progress, why does the progress differ?
Thank you, Sarah. I'm not sure I can give exact details of country specificities, but I can see generally that one of the potential bias when it comes to funding technology transfer has to do with the fact that mitigation technologies are largely been constructed as more feasible than adaptation when it comes to financing, and that has to do with the fact that mitigation technologies can be measured in time, which is something that adaptation technologies, when you have to make the case for how much adaptation are you going to provide with this technology solution, it becomes extremely difficult. So the challenge is how do you move beyond the kind of adaptation mitigation separation and start to think more largely about these co-benefits. So you see that for mitigation technologies, even when you look at DNA processes and technology action plans, it seems that African countries have already very thorough plans of how to deploy these technologies, but when it comes to adaptation, there is a clear gap in how they're going to achieve that through financing.
Thank you very much for that response, Lucas. I now have a question for Jens and Manon on the chart on research and development expenditures across income groups. If that is based on general research expenditure or specific to climate technology, and if the latter, how do you distinguish between research for climate technology and other types of research?
Thank you, Sarah. Maybe I can start and then invite Manon also to complement. So the basic answer to that is the chart that we showed does not differentiate between climate and non-climate technologies, which we had set, I think, was due to data challenges because basically it doesn't exist for many developing countries. I think it's possible to try to approximate it through a sector technology spending for some OECD countries, although within the sector spending, there's no differentiation between the climate technology or not. So that's why we said we use that just as a proxy to demonstrate the different levels of support and the different levels of expenditure that exists across different countries with different income levels. So I think that was a basic reply from me. I don't know, Manon, if you would like to complement or...
No, all good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. And I have another one here, which is for Lakshmi. What kind of technology hubs, incubation centers, and startup initiatives are underway, and how do they support climate technology development in Africa?
Thanks, Sarah. I think one prominent example we can give is the more dedicated climate innovation and business incubation centers that have been operational for over a decade now in 6 African countries, primarily Kenya, Uganda, Ghana, South Africa, Nigeria, and Senegal. Not all of the developments are being mapped at the same level. These are mostly donor financed. In the agri-food sector, we also note that in the report that we see green innovation centers operating in nearly 14 African countries, supporting smallholder farmers. The broader mapping that's being done in Africa for technology hubs and incubation centers do not focus a lot on the climate aspect of it and how they meet the climate challenges. And more importantly, the linkages between these science innovation policy developments with the transfer of climate technologies are also somewhat vague and not clearly understood, except for in some cases, like I mentioned, where the science tech hubs are already densely concentrated, and there are concentrated efforts to make progress on the technology diffusion element, and notably Kenya, South Africa, Nigeria, for instance.
All right, thank you very much. And we are running out of time, but I have a final question for Jens and Manon, and then I would actually like to invite you, Ambrosio, if you want to make any final remarks. But for Jens and Manon, there's here a comment or a question which says, thanks for pointing out the link between finance, research and development and climate technologies. Can you point to the role of carbon pricing and climate technologies and innovation? The EU has the highest carbon prices globally, and research points to a strong link between carbon pricing and climate technology innovation and deployment. So do you have any thoughts on that?
Thank you, Sarah. So we haven't particularly researched this section, but I think from a basic economic approach, it's very clear that comparative prices play a key role in making technologies viable or attractive. So if you don't internalize the costs of emissions, basically you have a bias, an inherent bias against certainly mitigation technologies. For adaptation technologies, maybe slightly different. So I think having a well-reflected full cost of different technologies would be essential to provide a efficient market response, but also to have efficient overall efficient pricing. So I think that's a very fundamental economic principle, and while we've not looked into that, it could play a key role, I think, in just basically having very strong effects in terms of the comparable cost competitiveness and effectiveness and attractiveness of different technologies.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And Ambrosia, I don't know if you want to come in and say some final words from your side before I close this event.
Thank you very much for the floor, Sarah. But I like to ask you to not close it after I say what I want to say, because I want to hear from the authors. And this is coming a bit in my role as member of the steering committee and how this report could be improved in the following years. So I will share what I believe could be the future focus of work. But of course, I want to hear from you on if you agree of this could take a different direction. I think this is a great opportunity since a lot of the lead authors of the chapters are here. This is just my opinion. This doesn't represent the rest of the DEC members on the board, so please take into consideration that. I believe the report could have a more regional depth, a bit more consistency on the focus. For example, in subchapter we selected specific technologies, but that was not reflected on all the chapters. Probably a bit of a more systemic approach between the chapters. I remember chapter 16 of Working Group 3 has this systemic view of innovation, and table 16.5 has specific indicators across the different functions of a well-functioning system of innovation. And I wonder if that could be used in the future version of this report as a way to integrate the different chapters and have a broader view of system of innovation across regions, in addition to the feasibility assessment applied to specific technologies. So we have an assessment focused on a specific set of technologies in mitigation adaptation, how they relate to each other and to the sustainable development goals. That's sort of the feasibility assessment, but also this more broader focus on national system innovations that relates directly, for example, to representation on finance, but also to other indicators. And then we have a basis to compare between regions and between years and to integrate the different considerations that are across the chapters. On the gaps, I think we might be missing a bit of an opportunity. I had a conversation with my Ministry of Science, and they were very interested in the work of the DEC, and especially on the gaps that need to be filled. So if we put up the gaps, but not mention this as a gap, but as our recommendations, countries in these regions or specific countries need to focus on this and this and this because we don't have knowledge or papers or anything published on that. That could be used to steer national finance in the science, if countries have science ministry of system or national system innovation. So the research inside those countries can help fill up those gaps, and later those publications could serve not only the report, but the IPCC process as a whole. That I think that's a huge opportunity there in terms of how the naming the specific gap could help not only steer funding to solve those gaps, but even on the process. We have the research and systematic observation, and I don't know if this can also serve a bit into that discussion. And also in that view, we have, for example, the feasibility assessment, institutional score low. I think they were say that institutional was that has got the lowest score on feasibility. It would be very helpful to have for specific countries or sub-regions. This is the reason it's scored low, because when you say that's the reason, you immediately have a recommendation, a policy recommendation. So this is what you have to do. And this is very good, right? Because at the end, what the aim for this will be to have these specific recommendations for policymakers, so you can hand them like directly on the spoon. This is what you should be doing at the regional or the national level in this specific continent, and that will be very, very useful and probably much appreciated. I will start right now. I really want to hear from the authors, of course. This is, at this point, reflects my personal opinion as a steering, as a member of the steering committee. Thank you very much for the opportunity, Sarah.
Thank you very much, and perhaps, Ambrosio, I really appreciate these reflections, and it's very useful to look at what have we been able to achieve and how far have we come with the report for this year. And perhaps instead of opening the floor, because we are running out of time, we have run out of time, I would actually like to say that we would like to invite all authors, steering committee members, for a meeting to discuss how we can further improve and prepare for the report coming up next year, so to speak. So if you would allow me, Ambrosio, I would make that invitation instead of opening the floor for questions or for responses and discussions at this point. But I appreciate your useful reflections. So with this, I would actually like to thank all of you very much, all the authors, all the presenters we have had with us, and all of you who have been involved in preparing the report, as well as the steering committee. The report is made available now online on our website, unepccc.org, and it will also be made available on the UNFCCC Tech website. So with that, thank you everyone, and I wish you a good, pleasant rest of the day. Thank you so much. Goodbye.